Hey up campers, Johnny Matthew here. Welcome back to the blog. If you're here for the first time, it is great to have you. You can subscribe for free, or you can buy me a pint and subscribe for as little as £5 if you want to support the work. But as always, you're welcome to this for nothing if that's your preference. So let's get into this one. When kids blame themselves, number one, understanding self-blame in childhood trauma. Introduction. If you've ever wondered why some people blame themselves for things other people did to them, things that are just not their fault, yeah, me too. I've long since lost count of the number of children I've worked with whose lives continue to be blighted, not only by the awful things done to them by others, but by an additional burden of blame they lay on themselves. From the viewpoint of someone who hasn't suffered in this way, it seems nuts. Why on earth would you even think you were responsible for what they did to you? Never mind form your self-identity around it and live like you're doing penance. But that's the point. It's neither a logical response to the trauma, nor something our imagined objectivity can help us understand. Origins of self-blame and internalized anger. Trouble kids almost always grow up in situations that skew their development. In other words, what happened to them is much more than a one-off or episodic event. More usually, it's something that sets and affects the very context in which they grow. It affects everything. So a child growing up in an environment lacking empathy, for example, will develop coping mechanisms to the current situation that persist right through into adulthood. They won't develop empathy itself in the way children in more stable and loving environments will. So two problems ensue here. Number one, the child lacks the huge benefits that empathic parenting affords. For example, good co-regulation, a positive internal working model that they're valuable and loved, trust for other people, and so on. Number two, the child doesn't learn to be empathic towards others. Empathy is not something learned cognitively like facts or information. It's felt. If you haven't felt empathy, you're unlikely to develop and be able to show empathy. Negative narratives of the child. Parents and others who care, inverted commas, for kids in ways that are abusive, neglectful, inconsistent, and so on, often add to their woes by speaking negatively to the child about the child. In other words, parents, carers say things like, "You're a pain in the..." fill in the blank. "I wish you'd never been born," or "Why were you born? Can't you just shut up and leave me alone? I hate you. You make life so..." fill in the blank, and so on. You get the idea. In other words, the child's narrative of themselves, given to them by the parent, is a blaming narrative in which the child is cast as the protagonist. The problem is not the abusive or inadequate parent in this view. It's the child themselves. So as the child begins to develop language, which in turn drives cognition, they learn, inverted commas, a sense that they are the problem. They begin to adopt the parent's narrative for themselves. Some kids will begin to say the same things about themselves that the parent does, or, more often in my view, they internalize it, adding to the negative internal working model they formed in the pre-verbal phase of their development. And all the self-focused negativity just keeps on being confirmed and consolidated. There's a lovely quote by Peggy O'Mara, a speaker, writer, publisher on parenting that you can read in the printed version of the post. But she says, "The way we talk to our children becomes their inner voice." Sums that up that idea beautifully of the parent's negative speech to the child becoming the child's inner speech about themselves. So far, so bad. For a child to accept that their caregivers, supposed sources of love and protection, are instead sources of distress can be overwhelming. It's just too much to take on. So to survive emotionally, they may internalize the idea that they are at fault, finding this less terrifying than facing the reality of unsafe family members or caregivers. As time progresses, this imbibed sense of the self as the problem will begin to emerge in speech and behaviour that makes them stand out, and not in a good way. Key points so far, 3 things here. Number 1, empathy lacking environments. Children in emotionally dismissive, abusive or hostile environments often resort to self-blame as a coping strategy. They inherit this from the poor attachment piece, internal and non-verbal, and from the caregiver's overtly negative narrative, what they say about the child, external and verbal. Number 2, denial of emotional needs. Accepting caregivers' narratives helps children avoid confronting the painful reality of emotional neglect or abuse. Arguably, it's easier, inverted commas, for the child to accept themselves as the problem than it is to confront the fact that they have abusive parents. This suppresses the child's emotional need for love and affection from those closest to them. Number 3, misplaced control. Self-blame provides a false sense of control as children believe changing themselves can prevent further harm. They may become labile, suffering swings of emotion, all the time striving to capture some sense of agency over how they feel and how others treat them, with the obvious problems that this brings. Adaptation, the mechanism behind self-blame. For vulnerable children, realizing their powerlessness is unbearable. Self-blame offers an illusion of understanding and control. If they're at fault, they can potentially fix themselves and fix the situation, to avoid further abuse and garner the much sought-after affection. This flawed mechanism makes sense, inverted commas, to the child trying to adapt to survive and to curry the favour of those closest to them. It provides a semblance of relative safety in an unpredictable environment. In this situation, the child has no time or opportunity to settle and become the person he or she really is. There's a quote here from Alice Miller, psychiatrist. Quote, "The child has a primary need to be regarded and respected as the person he or she really is at any given time, as the central actor in his or her own activity. This highlights how self-blame arises when a child's authentic self is not recognized or respected." Unquote. Let's have a few seconds breather and then we'll come back for the final section. Okay, consequences of self-directed anger. While self-blame helps the child avoid the realities around them and hold on to the illusion of loving parents, it misdirects anger and confusion inwards. This misdirection leads to a cycle of self-directed aggression, shame, and maintains a negative and distorted self-perception. Now and later on. Left untreated, a child in this situation will adapt to survive, but will form a skewed sense of self, believing that they are to blame for problems, constantly falling short of expectations, and feeling unworthy or unlovable. And so the cycle goes on. The child takes on the narratives of the abusers both internally and externally. Some will kick against this toxic mix and display anger, aggression, even violence towards others. Our prisons are full of people like this. Others will develop chronic, low or negative self-esteem, and the internalizing of constantly disparaging narratives takes root and bears the poisonous fruit of self-loathing. Later on, these kids become adults who self-blame and may take on excessive responsibility in relationships, accepting blame for issues beyond their control. It must be me. It's probably my fault, and so on. Final thoughts. If you work with troubled kids, whatever the setting, whatever your role, you'll doubtless recognize many of your service users in this account. Breaking free from self-blame involves reclaiming your life narrative from distortions sown in the throes of trauma and abuse. It's no easy task. While challenging, this process can lead to self-understanding, compassion, and a more fulfilling life. It can be a long and difficult road to travel, and one that most people will not achieve without help. So for those of us working with troubled kids who are the ones trying to help, we do well to remember the power of active, respectful listening and tons of empathy in gaining trust and gaining permission to help kids along their healing journeys. So next time, we'll look a bit more closely at what we can do to help. Thanks for listening to this one, and I'll see you in the next one.